I think the threat of $1 million lawsuit over your head really controls you. And I have to imagine that all of those threats, maybe one person was gonna leave during the pause. No, there's a threat of 50,000. Maybe someone wasn't gonna show up to the altar. No, there's a threat of that. You want a divorce. Like all of these things essentially control the decisions you make in your life that are important decisions. And maybe you don't want to continue being on TV. You're really losing your freedom to choose how you live your life during this period of time because they have this money that they're holding over your head that you probably can't pay. So that's really scary and it doesn't seem ethical. I don't know how it would hold up in court.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Eyes Wide Open. Our guest today is Jasmine Weg. She is a New York attorney and the founder of her own firm, Weg Law, focused on helping clients find the right solutions for commercial litigation, business disputes, and property matters. The firm also drafts and reviews business documents and estate planning documents. But we're not here to talk about that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. We're here because Jasmine recently found herself doing a deep dive into the Love is Blind contract and analyzing elements of it and sharing her legal perspective, which is why I have you on today. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, how are you today? Doing all right?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm in Chicago and it's snowing, so I'm just kind of like throwing my arms up in the air and being like, WTF.
I don't know how you guys do it. That winter never ends in Chicago.
It was literally nicer in February for longer periods of time than it has been the last 2 weeks.
Okay, we had them in New York also, actually. We had 70s and then now it's been freezing. But I feel a little more hope. I feel like in Chicago, you guys go to like May, right?
I always kind of say my birthday's May 13th. So I'm always kind of the mindset that up until that point, we might have snow.
Mine is March 17th, and I always think when my birthday signals spring, but I guess it's a New York thing.
That makes sense, though. That's like around St. Patrick's Day?
It's like a couple days before, so it's on St. Patrick's Day actually. So everybody's out. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys? So we do crazy St. Patrick's Day in Chicago. Like people are up drinking at 6 a.m. And by the way, we do it the Saturday before, and again, some people do it on St. Patrick's Day if they're not aligned. So what's it like in New York?
It's really crazy. It's really fun. I always felt like as a kid, I'm like, everybody's celebrating me. But it's only really in the city that it's like a huge thing. Everywhere else it's like pretty low key. But in Manhattan, all of the bars are like hopping and just people are day drinking. So it's cool. It's fun to see.
Yeah, it's a blast. I should experiment outside of Chicago to see what another city's like for it.
That was pretty cool though. I only went there once, but I had a nice time. It's just like a pretty city, I feel like.
I think so too. And not to dig on New York, aside from your pizza, I don't enjoy the New York pizza, but we don't have to have that debate. I know. It's just
That's a big point of intention.
It is. If you want to leave now, I understand.
Even in New York, like my friends and I fight over what's good pizza. I will be like shocked what someone else says, but like forget it. Leaving New York, like we think it's in the water, and that's why we have really good bagels also. So like in my mind, you can't have good bread like that outside of New York.
It's so funny you say that because Lou Malnati's is deep dish. They also do thin crust or tavern style. That's kind of like the big one everyone knows of for deep dish in Chicago. And their secret ingredient they claim is the Lake Michigan
New York water?
No, it's Lake Michigan water.
Oh my gosh.
So it's kind of like, okay, I guess it's a water thing. That's what really
It is a water
differentiates our
thing,
pizzas.
especially for bagels. I don't know why, but I guess because they're boiled, maybe it just absorbs more, but you guys probably don't have better bagels, right? You can't make that argument.
No, and everyone I know from New York is like, they're miserable about the bagel selection here in
Yeah, I can
Chicago.
imagine.
It's
Okay,
like
at
all
least
these
we can agree on that one.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're not going to get an argument from me there. I'm fine with New York bagels. It's just the pizza. So I want to ask you the same question I ask all my guests when we get started, and this is going to be a fun one. But what did you want to be when you were growing up, and how did that change to where you ended up?
So, believe it or not, when I was a kid, I always said I wanted to be a lawyer just because I was like, I would get in trouble with my principal, and then we would be arguing in elementary school. And then at the end of the conversation, like, you're fine, you win. And I'm like, he's like, you'd be a great lawyer. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, I didn't know what a lawyer was. I was just like, oh, that's like when you just are, keep on arguing until you win. But still like I majored in sociology, and after college I actually went for a master's in applied social research. So I thought I was going to do like marketing research. I was interested in like, I was just been interested in people. Sociology I was like
Hmm.
obsessed with, but that's like not really a job. I don't know. I couldn't find anything in it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had my first kid, and I'm still streaking with him, but like I knew I wanted like a career. And so I started exploring, and I just was like, actually, my husband was like, you always wanted to be a lawyer. I'm like, oh, I was like when I was a kid. And he's like, yeah, but that's like the only thing you said you never always wanted to be. And it's like, like sometimes you fight the thing that you were meant to do, or like, because it's just, I don't know why I would do that. But
It's
anyway,
interesting. That's a good
yeah,
point,
because
though.
my husband did the same thing because he was like a natural software engineer. He was programming when he was in high school just for fun. And I was like, and he was like, that's the last job I want to do. And of course, he's a software engineer and he was very good at it. So, but yeah, so I was like, if I can get into law school and if I can get a scholarship, I'll go because it's really expensive. And I'm a mom now. I can't be spending, 400K. And thank God I got a full scholarship and it was a no brainer. I was like, okay, it's not even going to cost me anything. I had a very I really like 100% I would be amazing at this. So I was just like, okay, I could go. It's, let's see how I do. And honestly, I now after practicing, I'm finally at the stage where I don't have that imposter syndrome and I can just say like, yeah, I'm actually really good at this.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah.
What is it about imposter syndrome? I've been doing marketing for most of my career and I still have it. Like I'll work on something and I'll be like, am I doing this right? I've been doing it for 15 years, Nick.
Yeah.
It's so
My
weird.
gosh, it's crazy. It is such a terrible thing. And now I'll just try not to overthink things. I'm very like, hit class and
Mm,
just like go with it. And that helps me with not second guessing myself, not, especially when I decided to start showing up on social media. Like, obviously, a lot of the things I put out, I would look at and be like I would cringe myself. I'm like, who the heck wants to see this?
right.
But like there's no other way to, if you want to spread your message, if you want to build a business, if you want to create a client base, there's no other way to do it other than to just jump out there and like be cringe until people no longer, like once people start to like it, it's so funny. The same cringy things are so cute and so awesome.
They make you human. I think people that show up on social media and they're always in a lot of makeup or always dressed real nice. And it's just, there's a level of like inauthenticity on
Mm-hmm.
that where those little quirks aren't there. You don't stand out and people don't really get the opportunity to know you as a
Like
human.
you're a real
Why?
person. Yeah,
Right,
it's
right.
true.
Which
And
is,
also, like when I started this, sorry,
no, no, go
when
ahead.
I started working in something that was, uh, I guess it's a technical job. It can be dry. It can be intense. It's a creative side to me, and really I love to laugh. I love to be silly, and I like to make things. Like I like to like feel like I'm doing something creative. And so for me, starting the Instagram page, which I started first, was like here's like putting my personality into what I do. Here's like making jokes out of what I do, and like I don't know, just for me, it felt like it completed the circle. Like I was getting everything I wanted from what I do by having that creative element to it.
Yeah, I think that's actually, especially if you're talking about legalities and laws and contracts and stuff, it can get really dry really quickly if you don't insert your personality into it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, eventually you're staring at your computer and you're starting to see doubles. So That's when it's time for a quick, TikTok cruise.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's dive into this Love is Blind contract. But before we do that, I want you to tell people a little bit about your practicing law and what attracted you to reviewing this contract. I heard you say in another interview that you just couldn't resist when you found out that it was publicly available.
Yeah, sure. So my practice of law is, like you said earlier, I do commercial litigation, which is basically disputes. A lot of times it's over a contract, like a breach of contract, or it could be over unpaid invoices, things like that. And then I draft business documents, I draft agreements, NDAs, letters, and some estate work. And actually, what got me interested in all Logan's one legal issues was first you, because I saw a clip of you and
Oh,
Danielle. Yeah, I saw some of you guys talking about uh, your work conditions, and I was like, 1 second, work? And it really struck a chord for me because all of a sudden you were talking about Love is Blind as this job and how mistreated you were and the wage issues. And I had never thought of that. I literally never thought of you guys as employees.
and me
Then
neither
later,
at the time. Yeah.
yeah, that was so interesting to me because once I thought about it, I was like, hey, that's a really good point. But nobody else probably thinks of you that way either. And that's also going to like shape the way people view what they think you deserve, or how valid your issues that you raise with the show are too. Because if you're an employee, like, okay, these are your bosses mistreating you versus you get to do this show and get to be famous, it's just a whole different perspective. So that's what
Mhm.
really initially like struck my interest. And then this Ethan Frye, former cast members, those two also came out and over the past year, and that's when the contract was then released. Because the funny thing is that like usually these kind of contracts are so top secret, with good reason, because why would they want that to be out there? But once you
Mhm.
file something in the US, most filings are public, and then you're going to have to use the contract as a exhibit because most of these lawsuits center around the terms of the contract. So I knew I was going to be able to review it in full and have a good copy. And I was like, hey, that's interesting because like there's going to be so much information in there. I think it's a lot more than I ever expected. So it was pretty cool.
I can imagine. I remember, and I shared this a little with you at the beginning. When I first got it, I guess I kind of knew what was going to be in it, right, for the most part. But it is like, even reading through it and then having lived through it, I think like there were parts of it that I just glazed over that I probably shouldn't have glazed over and thought nothing of.
For
And then there were
sure.
parts I had amended. So like the piece I had to have amended was, as you know, in these contracts, they basically own every interview publicity that you do for an extended period of time. And I would have to do that for work as a product marketer. You're evangelizing your product, you're going on related podcasts, you're doing interviews with the press and all that stuff. But that's something that I think people just glaze over, right? Like you can't, you have to get permission to like start a podcast. Like you have to get permission to do all of this stuff.
Even if it has nothing to do with the show.
So if you're going to reference the show, reference it in, so like my intro of my original podcast, which used to be called Conversations with Nick Thompson, I rebranded it to Eyes Wide Open. But my original one, I did say, you might know me from Love is Blind, but here we're going to be talking about ABC. And so like you have to get that stuff approved because they don't want you to do anything really without their permission. So I went
For
on
sure.
another example. I went on the show Breaking Points, which is a YouTube independent news show. And they wanted to talk to me about my politics because I talked a little bit about it in the show. Nothing about the show, nothing about gossip. I had to get permission to do that. So it's very like parts you might look over as someone who's experienced it. Like you might not think anything of, like there's so much repercussion coming from those.
Yeah, like you didn't know how these things are going to play out. So you're signing, and I think most people really blindly sign contracts. And the people who review contracts, they're usually reviewing it for the things that they have some, weariness about. So the portion, and in that, people might not even think to stop and look at that part because they're like, okay, so I won't talk about it. But hey, you're only getting publicity because your name is associated with that show. And then if you can't mention it, you're going to lose these opportunities. So that's, losing
Yeah.
work opportunities. People don't realize the ramifications of like these little things that we must have. So I think that's, and one of the things I was talking about with, actually when I was doing the Fox 5 thing was, the contracts are drafted one-sided because the production is the one who's drafting the contract. So they're not thinking about you. You're going to put in, whenever you write a contract, you're always going to have some, like, think about the other side. Okay, certain clauses are going to go both ways and there's protections for the other party. But for the most part, you draft for your client, and that's what a good attorney does. And you try to get in as much as you can for your client in the hopes that their attorney won't redline it, which is like cross it out and send it back. And I think when you have a reality show where people are super, psyched to get on, I'm really, thrilled to just have an opportunity to be on TV. That's violated everything in the contract. I don't know if everyone, I think you mentioned you actually had an attorney review it.
I
I
reviewed
wonder
it
how many
myself.
people, you reviewed it
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah. So like, this is a big contract. Most people wouldn't probably review it with an attorney, but that's like, you were signing away, not just, for the period of the show. It goes, certain things go for 11 months after, certain things are for 5 years after. You're signing away a big chunk of your life, not realizing that you're going into a climate kind of.
I totally agree with you. And you don't think of those things, right? You know what the biggest consideration for me, aside from the amendment, was that I can't run for office for 5 years. And I had thought about running for office for several years here in Chicago. And so for me, I was kind of
Wow.
like, is that something I really want to sign away for 5 years?
Right.
Yeah, that was like, so
That was something that was like important to you. So that's the only thing you really had to weigh over. How you're probably, glazing over other parts that you can't imagine are important to you until they
exactly.
come into fruition. Yeah. Well,
And
that's
with
so
the attorney,
interesting.
yeah, it is. And that's why I encourage people, really review it kind of with a critical eye yourself. And here's the thing too, this wasn't the case for me. I don't actually remember how long I had to review it, but some other cast members were literally like given it on a Friday and told they have to sign it by end of day Monday or they're not going to be on the show. So
And that's
I don't
actually the
know.
legal strategy. You create urgency when you want to do a deal. You create a timeline. I remember my first job, my boss told me I had to tell her by the end of the day. And I was so scared. Like, my first job offer. I was so scared. I was like, she's not going to give me the job if I made her wait. Finally, I settled on asking for like a weekend. And of course, she said yes. Like, that's just a perceptive, technique to make people think that they have no other choice and to get people to just say yes. So, but you didn't know that going in. You're like, okay, otherwise they're going to give it to the next guy waiting in line.
Exactly.
So that's so unfair.
That's exactly right. I couldn't agree more. So you've mentioned a few things, but what was like the most surprising thing to you, or some of the most surprising things to you when you did read the contract?
Well, so I think the surprising thing was the stipend at all, because I don't know if everyone knows that it's a paid casting. So I think that surprised me. And then the amount that you're paid, because what's interesting is with a contract, in order to have a binding contract, you have to have consideration, which means that both sides are giving something. So you're giving your time doing this. Ostensibly, they're giving you they're giving you the airtime, they're going to sponsor the weddings, but they're also giving you that stipend. So the interesting thing is like they want to say you're not working for them, but they're paying you. So they want to like make sure they have a valid contract to hook you on all those terms. So there is a stipend, it's consideration, but they don't want to call it pay. So I think that was very interesting how they structured it, why they called it a stipend. Obviously you're getting paid how many weeks you work, right? So it's 1,000 if you do the first week, 8,000 if you do the whole show. So it's kind of sounding like a salary, but on the other hand, they're not phrasing it as a salary. It's interesting how they use their wording. The divorce That was crazy. The whole
Hold that.
yeah.
I actually want to say something about the stipend. So this is what's so interesting. And I don't know if you've seen any of my content on this, but what's interesting is you're labeled a contractor. You've got words like stipend, the weeks, all of this stuff. Then we were issued W-2s, which are issued to employees,
Employees only.
right, in the state of
And you should have gotten a
California.
1099 if you're a
Right.
independent contractor, right?
Exactly. And then in California, which Jeremy Hartwell has a lawsuit against Kinetic and Netflix, a class action suit, alleging that we were underpaid based on California labor law. Because if you look at California labor law, which is where we were issued the W-2, the amount of hours we worked were being filmed, all of that stuff actually would classify us legally as an employee just by the amount of hours and a couple other indicators. So it almost felt like they were contracting us as contractors so that they didn't have to abide by labor law, but at the same time, to the government wanted to, in California, to abide by the law, issue us W-2s. So it's like this very weird. I joke because every day I'm finding out like new levels to this, but it's like the levels of the CIA with how much construct there is to how these shows are working and who's
Yes.
involved and what strings are being pulled.
It really tells you that there was a lot of thought put into the contract, and every word was mulled over and chosen precisely. So the reasoning they used when they say a stipend, it was intentional. It was meant to not appear as a salary. It was meant so that if it's ever brought into litigation, they could say, hey, no, this was not an employee. But on the other hand, you really have to think about what you're doing there. Like, I always think, like, let's say you didn't get married at a show. So you don't get the screen time necessarily. And so then you also don't get the social media presence. So what do you get from the show? So you gave, your time, you left your job, maybe you got fired after 8 weeks of being a no-show. Who knows what sacrifice you made. If you get nothing, then you also weren't paid for work you did. Then it truly is a
Yep.
job. And obviously you can't separate by the people who worked because they didn't get married and the people who didn't. Like, it really is a job because you're taking a chance, you're going there, you're making them a ton of money, which is what everyone does for their boss. So
Yes.
it kind of sounds like a job and looks like a job, but they want to, cloak it in something else.
I think you said it better than I have been saying it for a year right there. So that's
And
how I
also,
feel too. And
reality TV is a really well-paying job too for some. Vanderpump Rules, like if you follow those casts, they went from like kids kind of like scraping by to buying houses in Hollywood Hills. So we know that reality stars are paid. And we don't have a problem thinking about them being paid. So I'm not sure why, like, I know people had a big issue with these lawsuits and their complaints because they didn't like the idea of Love is Blind former cast members taking issue with not being paid properly or the labor issues, wages, hours. But, nobody has a problem with all these other reality stars getting paid substantial sums. It's just like, it doesn't seem fair.
yeah, I agree. And I think you nailed it. Actually, maybe this was before we were recording, you said this, but you kind of said it earlier. There's like different types of shows. There's the ones that have the recurring cast, like you mentioned, the Housewives. But then there's the ones like A Love is Blind or Married at First Sight or The Bachelor, where there's kind of a universe. You can get on different shows if you do certain things and play your cards certain ways and have certain levels of popularity. But let's take that aside. It's really like normal, or the perception is it's normal everyday people being put in these experiments. And I think that people have that mindset that they're just like them, and they are, like, we're all human beings, so I'm not saying, but that they're just like them. Whereas they might look at like a Bethany Frankel or a Tom Sandoval or any of these people on these recurring shows, they might look at them more as like a celebrity or a performer or something like that.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point because, like you're saying, you're on a show to find love. So then people out in America are just watching and they're like, okay, They're regular people who left their job for a little bit of time. They're thinking you're doing like Family Feud or The Price is Right. They're not
Right.
seeing it as reality TV the same way, these housewives are showing up to this beautiful party in someone's mansion. At the end of the day, though, it's TV. It's curated, and you
Right.
were telling me it's quite curated, which really blew my mind earlier.
Yeah, I mean it's again, I'm not trying to end reality TV. I think it is perfectly acceptable to enjoy it. I have enjoyed it, not a lot, but here and there. And I think the problem is the perception that what you're seeing is an actual depiction of events. And if you think about, like Love is Blind, for example, there's thousands and thousands and thousands and hours of footage. There's off-screen time that you don't see. There's context that's missing from the spliced together scenes that you do see. You're in a manufactured environment that doesn't translate to how real life is. There's so many things that are contributing to what you're seeing on the screen. And to watch it with the idea that what you're seeing is reality is just, it's not an accurate representation. Even if you have someone who's like, yeah, that was my story, or that was pretty close to me being represented. Like, I would say I was pretty close to being represented how I am in real life, right? So that doesn't mean that there weren't scenes that I had to act out because something happened off screen that they wanted on screen. That doesn't mean that scenes aren't edited out of order for storyline purposes. That doesn't mean that there weren't clips where I sat on one side of the pod and I know when I watch it back, I was saying this to somebody else or saying it about somebody else, and they edit it in a way to make it, so when you're watching these things, if you can watch them with the concept that you're watching like a soap opera, or
Right.
I always say like WWE, where it's kind of like, it's fun, there's a like real edge to it. People are just amplified versions of their personality in a lot of cases, and you can kind of like enjoy it as if it's real, but know in the back of your head that it's actually just for entertainment. And it's just
Yeah.
entertainment that is
And
spliced
like
together
I,
to tell
I know like
stories.
back in the day when I would watch reality, you would hear all of a sudden one line that you could tell was like added later because it didn't fit the audio was a little different. And I don't hear that as much on the living side, probably because technology is just better. But like some things are just, hey, that was like the perfect line that we just got inserted right there. Like anyone who really watches reality TV has to know that nothing is this perfect. Like
Yeah.
things don't just line up that well without some behind the scenes pushing and pulling.
Right. And I have heard from several people who work in the industry or have worked in the industry that there's actually like storyline sessions where they're building out the storyline and then like kind of retrofitting you into that storyline. So like these,
I
you
think we
think
see
of,
how that was blind.
oh, totally. I mean, I look at it when I heard that and I look back on it, I was like, that makes a lot of sense how this
Right.
happened and why it ended up going the way that it went and
I
why we were
almost
in
feel like the birth
situations.
control this season, like I don't know if I'm the only one who felt like that, but it was kind of like a weird non-issue. But they might not have had anything interesting, and like not that they weren't interesting people, but they nothing really interesting came out of it. It's like I don't know if all horrors are like this, but I was thinking, like, why do they keep coming back to this? Like, okay, do it or like don't be under control. I don't care whether like who cares. But
Right.
they kept coming back. I was like, okay, that's a storyline for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, and I know for my experience, they kept trying to make us talk about my student loans because I have student loans and she doesn't. And she was just like, I don't care.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't care that she doesn't. Lucky her. She's like, I'm lucky I don't have him. He owns a condo. I rent. Like it was just a non-issue, but they kept trying to make that an issue. That and they kept it's all retro looking back on it, pushing the maturity thing. Like, am I
Hmm.
too mature for her and her friends? And they wanted drama
Right.
between the friends and the friends all got along and we all went on a vacation together at some point. And it was just like nothing there. So they definitely have these, and I think they pivot, right, when something comes up, but they have other options maybe in this case when something isn't
Hmm.
going as planned, but they do have these situations kind of mapped out and they're designed to put you in like kind of a level of I would say like discomfort, right? Like one day they had us paddle boarding when we were in Mexico, and we ended up not doing it because Danielle got sick. But I was like, I would never paddleboard in my life. Like I
Me
am not.
either. I would never
I'm
do that. Actually, I always think if I was on one of these shows, these dating shows, I'm not adventurous. So I would feel like sitting on the car, like just waiting until the date was over because I'm too scared to go like zip lining.
oh my God,
Oh
I
my
would
gosh,
never
I
zip line.
always think about that. So that's so relatable.
Totally. And I would say too, you know how they would edit you if you refused to do it, that you were
Yeah,
mean, not
right,
interested, not
right,
participating. Yeah, it would be brutal.
right.
So
Instead
you
of
were
just a
saying
big
then,
baby.
right, exactly. Like scared of heights,
Yeah,
not zip lining kind of thing.
that's the
So
thing.
I interrupted you to kind of sidetrack us a minute, but you were saying another thing that was um, standing out to you about the contract was the marriages piece. Is that something you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, there was a lot there. So basically, the whole that you have to show up to the altar, I didn't have mixed feelings about it on Ethan because after watching a lot of seasons, I really felt like that was an element. Like they show up and little they say yes, little they say no. But once you find out that it's really incumbent on you to show up, it also takes away a little bit from the mystery. It's really like it kind of actually agrees with some of the things you see along the way because you see couples kind of like not looking like they're going to progress on marriage, and they don't even seem happy. So you're like, why would they show up? But knowing that they have to show up, you kind of understand that part. So I kind of have mixed feelings about it because from the show's perspective, I see why that would be an element. Because what do they really have otherwise? If
Mm-hmm.
it's send, and they don't say you have to say yes. So to me, that's not an unfair clause. You agree to show up unless something's going on between you and the other person that would make it really like a bad situation for you to show up. And that's where I think the contract could have nuance. Like they could, they thought about a lot of things. They could think about things that would be difficult or negative for the participant and put some protection in there. So they could have said, if the relationship is, I don't know the exact language, but if you don't feel safe, maybe you don't have to go because it is a little bit like shameful for someone to show up to the altar and maybe that person was really disrespectful or abusive or just, like it is crazy to show up and wait for your decision
Mm-hmm.
when you're in that kind of situation. So I think I understood the clause. It wasn't crazy to me, but they could have done more for you as a participant in that clause. That part was, interesting to me. Also, when you want to back out, the fact that you need to give them what they deem a reasonable excuse, and you vote of parentheses, if you want to leave, it's got to be an emergency level, either a personal emergency or family emergency, and then ultimately they decide whether it meets their reasonable test.
Right.
Well, to me, that just leaves it way too open because let's say you bring whatever your reason is to them, they have full discretion, and then obviously there's that potential $50,000 fine, which they say that now they don't have anymore. But in the season 5 contract, it's still there. So I don't know because I think that something happened for season 6 before these lawsuits came out from season 5. So I'm not 100% sure that it's not still there. But to like what's ever public knowledge, as far as I know, it's in season 5 contract. And yeah, you risk the $50,000 fine if you want to leave. And that kind of ties back to the whole, some of these lawsuits, the plaintiffs say they were falsely imprisoned. I know when I did a reading on that, people were like, falsely imprisoned? Are you crazy? You signed up to be in a pot. But if you have to pay $50,000, which you might not have, your feet are held to the fire. Like, how can you
Mm-hmm.
leave if you don't have that money? Like, that's very scary for a young person.
To give a production company $50,000 that has the hottest reality
Right.
dating show like in the world,
So you're
and
giving
I'm gonna
charity
pay.
to a billionaire. It's crazy.
Right, exactly. And that is totally crazy. And to your point, so season 6, that's North Carolina, season 6 in Charlotte actually filmed in April May and maybe June of last year. So
Mhm.
there was one
2023.
loss. Yeah, exactly. 2023. There was one lawsuit at the time that was Jeremy's. The second and third came fall of
November and
last year.
January, right?
Yeah. Fall of last year, and maybe January for the other one. So what I have found is I feel like the production company and the people involved there, they're trying to run the press, right? The publicity of it all.
Mhm.
And I don't believe that they're being truthful. I just think they are propagandizing to say this isn't in the contract anymore, because there was a whole story about it. It had to be September because I was traveling for work. Yeah, so it was September of last year when the story came out saying that $50,000 is something that's just legacy reality TV. We've taken it out, and they must have just taken it out, if they did, for the season they were going to be filming in the fall. Because if they were filming in the spring and it's still in there in the contract you've read, then they wouldn't have had any provoking to remove it yet at that time.
That was exactly my theory. Like, they claim it's no longer in their contract, and it might be true. I can't say yes or no, but it definitely is in the season 5 contract. And I've seen that contract in 2 different instances, and it's been authenticated because in order for it to be filed in a court proceeding, it has to be authenticated for truthfulness. So we know that that's a real $50,000 fine is a real part of the contract. We just don't know if it's in the season 6 one. But I do have this theory that perhaps they made it behind the scenes clear to the participants that if you come to us with your reason why you want to leave, or on a show to the altar, we'll let you. And then thinking about the show's image, so like a story like this season's Lauren, okay, her, fiance that he may or may not have cheated, but he stayed out all night with another woman. The show is gonna look crazy if she shows up. When is she gonna show up with tears and red eyes? Like, she's obviously not gonna say yes. The show would look crazy, and it would actually delegitimize the show. So there lies to let certain storylines not continue to play out when it just looks foolish. Like, it doesn't make any
What
sense at
works for
all.
them, when it works better for them to let you leave, is when they
Right.
let you leave.
Exactly. And I thought in the reunion, Nick and Vanessa were working overtime to make sure that this show looks like it is only out for true love and there's no ulterior motives. I felt like that was underlying the entire reunion, that message. And
Well, and
I think, yeah.
I think what's funny is you read the comments and the stuff people say about the season, and they're, for the most part, and what is the right reason now? I think there's a debate to be had there. I used to say the right reason is to find love, right? That's what they sold me on, that this was different, that it wasn't about clout, that they were looking for regular people that wanted to get married and were ready and all this stuff. But it makes you wonder, like, what's casting's responsibility, right? Like, why do you go through psych evaluations? Why do you go through all of this time sharing all of the things you're looking for in a partner and your details of your past relationships, of what worked and what didn't work? Like, if they can't decipher through that, if the real reason is to help people find love, then how do you decipher, or how do you justify putting people that are clearly not there for marriage into these roles, and then kind of like revert back to them and be like, you guys did this wrong, you're supposed to come for love and that whole underlying experience you're talking about? Like, it just doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, I actually was thinking about the whole background check and psych eval concept a lot, because in the contract they actually say that you must agree to a background check and psych eval. And I'm actually curious, like, do they for sure do it? Because when I read that from like a critical lens, I thought, you must agree to it, but we are not promising everyone you will date has undergone one. So like, it wasn't like a mutual promise. It wasn't like whoever you will meet in this experience will have undergone a thorough background check and a thorough psych eval. But it was saying you agree to be subject to one, because then you see some people on the show, you're like, they seems like a psychopath. Like, how did this person get through? And then sometimes people, like, Some people aren't even crazy. Like you said, some people just are very like clear in the communication that they're not that desperate to get married. And it's almost like the person that they're with has to like sell them on marriage. And you're like, hey, why would you do a show that's 100% geared toward marriage and you don't even know if you want to get married? That doesn't make any sense at all.
And
That's
how do you
just
go through extensive psych evaluations? There's a test, there's interviews with a psychologist. Like, for example, my psychologist that did my psych eval, I actually had her talk to my therapist because I wanted to like make sure that people were being vetted properly and there for the right reasons, because what I didn't want to happen was that I would end up in this like storyline that wasn't real, right? Because
right.
I could
It's
concept that
scary.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I talk to people who have applied or who are going on the show or thinking about going on the show or whatever that looks like, the thing that's super relatable to them that I tell them, and again, this wasn't my experience, but I kind of saw it starting to happen, where people are there and they want to go further because they want more fame, they want more followers, they want more clout, all of that stuff. And so I tell people when they're going on the show thinking about it, like, remember, just because you're there for this reason of finding love and thinking maybe this could work for you, or if you're going there because you want clout and 15 minutes of fame or whatever, like, there's people on the other side that might be doing the same thing. And so you could go all the way to the altar with the person that you think you're going to spend the rest of your life with, and they never had any intention of marrying you. And then what does that do to you? You know what I mean?
At this point, can we imagine that anyone doesn't in some way want like some sort of fame? Maybe they also want to get married, and maybe some people more want marriage than fame, but you know you're getting some fame. You know you're getting a lot of followers. I don't know how you can, I don't even know how you can assume anyone will be there 100% for the right reasons anymore. Other
I
than
completely agree.
really early on. Because like when you did the show, I don't know if people got super famous on socials, or maybe only like the couples who got married. It was probably less famous and less of a sensation, right?
It was actually, so I'm super naive, but so that really quickly, that's kind of what you said it better than I did. When I say like, what is the right reason? I think now that the show is so famous and so many people watch it around the globe, it's the most watched reality TV show in the world. I think there's a case that it could be like, I'm going on to get famous and maybe I'll get married. And maybe that doesn't make that person a bad person. I'm totally
I
open to that
mean, I
conversation
am
at this point.
100% as a viewer knowing this person, hey, they're really attractive. They're going to become really popular after this. The world's going to love them. I don't mind still watching them date. Like, I don't think that the two things can't be true. And I think it's like really naive to think that anyone would go on a show that will be aired to the world and not in some way enjoy. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying being famous or popular. Like, why? That's a big part of our culture right now. That's just kind of how people do business nowadays. It's not an inherently wrong thing, but it also, like, when it comes to a relationship, your desire for fame or popularity, if that's coming into the relationship, that's obviously going to cause problems. That's not going to. It's in some way, it's not going to manifest well. I feel like.
I completely agree with you. And coming out, married and in a relationship, there's also that element that neither of us really thought about, and I'm using a marketing term, but it's like, what's your go to market as a couple, right? Like, we never thought about that. And then all of a sudden, and what I mean by go to market as a couple, like, who are we as a couple publicly,
Right. What's
right?
your
And
couple's aesthetic?
right, exactly. And so we were kind of both doing our own thing, and I was never interested in the fame really that came from it. And she wasn't either, so I'm not trying to say that, but like, from my point of view, I was thinking like, well, what can I do to make a difference? How can I leverage this to do good things and talk about the things I want to talk about? And I've said this 100 times before, but like, I on this show and other shows, like, I care about news and politics. I care about living a healthy, holistic, like making my own products, that kind of stuff. And then I to talk about. I try. I'm not even that good at it as I will be, but try talking more about mental health and men's mental health and all of that stuff. And right out of the gate, our publicist was like, "Yeah, you can't really talk about that stuff. Do you want to talk about sports?" Like it was because mental health is fine, but don't go too deep into it. You're going to really divide people and alienate people with news and politics. Don't talk about it. And then if you want to talk about the holistic stuff, be careful because you might turn away big brand opportunities if you make everything yourself. And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God, those are all the things I'm interested in, the things that
I
you wanted to talk
know,
about.
I
Tell me
know.
about holistic. I'm like, I'm ordering a new vitamin every day. I'm like so easily sold on this crazy stuff. But like,
My gosh,
that's
you should see
crazy
my
that
vitamin corner on my. It's like, which I didn't take my vitamins today. I have to remember to do that.
me either, actually.
Good reminder. Good reminder. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy, and so there's just so much that goes into it, and I think people who are doing it for their 15 minutes, like, fine, just be honest about it. And then I think if the show wants to maintain some level of that, we're a love story, we're a psychological based experiment, blah 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 blah, that brand that they have for it, I think they need to do a better job of casting people so that the mix is a little bit better. Like you're saying, like maybe it's 60-40, want to get married, want fame.
Yeah.
My mindset going in was, I was naive. So to go back to your other question, this kind of ties to it. So the season 1 people got uber famous, like millions of followers, some of them, because the show came out right when COVID hit. So people just watched it. And I remember everyone talking about this show. And I was like, what the heck is this show everybody's talking about? And then when I got reached out to by a casting manager, I went and actually watched the show. And I did watch it. And I was like, this is different. This isn't the
Yeah.
season of The Bachelor I watched. This isn't the,
It was
the
very
times I would
heartwarming.
dabble. It was, and they were authentic. And I say
Mhm.
this all the time. If it was The Bachelor or like a Bachelor in Paradise level of drama, I would have never done it. But I believed that I was actually seeing these people, not all of them. Like I kind of knew, Jessica from season 1 was definitely like being edited into a certain way, but I looked at the
Sure.
couples and I was like, wow, they're pretty authentic seeming. Like they seem like they actually took this experiment seriously. And if I could find someone that did that, like maybe this could work. So I kind of went in with the mindset of, if I go in here and I end up getting married and meeting the person that's going to be my partner, cool. If I go home the first day because I don't connect with anyone, cool. I stepped out of my comfort zone. And I actually had no idea how big the show was until I told HR very casually at work, like, hey, this is coming out, or they're announcing the cast next week. And she was basically like, shut the front door. Like, what? This is the biggest
No.
reality show. And everybody's waiting for season 2. And I was like, oh. And then I went to sleep, 348 Instagram followers the next day. And I never posted, right? I wasn't on social media very often. It was pictures of my
Sure.
dog. Then the next day after the cast announcement, I'm up to like 7,000. And then over the course of the show airing, like I'm up to over 300,000. And I'm like, this is nuts. This is so like
So I
now
feel
people
like if
know
they
that.
casted people like you who have not a big, who like that didn't have a big social media presence, you're going to get people who aren't there for that huge presence. But if you cast someone who's showing up all the time on social media and growing, already loves that attention and has a ton of followers, what do you really expect? Like, obviously, that's going to be a motivating factor. I mean, so that's one way to do it. They can cast people who aren't, big people on social media, but it also makes you question, is that what they're looking for? Because it doesn't seem like that's really something they're looking
Exactly.
for.
Exactly. So
Maybe
that's
like they want 1 or 2 people like that, but they don't want a
for
whole
the
show of
drama.
it.
Right,
Yeah.
for the drama. So I
Right.
think you're right, and I think that's where, instead of Nick and Vanessa shaming people for being on this show looking for things other than love, like casting and the producers need to take a step back and make sure they're contributing the right kind of people to this as well, if that's what they're going to continue to say is the purpose of the show.
They
That's my
have to
take on
take
it.
some responsibility that
Right.
it's their show. They ultimately are the ones who say yes and no to whoever goes on the show. They can't act like they don't know who's here for the right reasons. If they're doing all these checks that you're telling me they did, check the social media,
Yeah.
check how they show up online. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I got reached out to on LinkedIn because that's where I was most active, right? So it's like, it's funny, and I just think they got some
That's a good place they
responsibility.
can look for people who aren't looking for fame. Although now people are on LinkedIn with these like, I don't know, these stories about like the most minor thing that they did one day and they make it really meaningful. That's like how people get tons of followers on LinkedIn.
You're so right. I just read one of them this morning. I was like, this saga, and I was so invested in it. I wasn't expecting it on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a whole new weird thing.
Yes. So I one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I think this kind of combines some of the questions together, but are there any pieces in this contract? So, we have the you have to stay married piece, which I'd love to actually maybe start getting your thoughts there on the piece that
Yeah.
you have to stay married, because that was a personal experience that I had to go through. And yeah, and then also, like, are there parts of this contract that you look at and you're like, I don't know if that's legally enforceable? So we can start with the weddings and maybe or the marriages and go from there.
Yeah. So in the contract, you have to stay married until 1 year after until 1 year after filming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or 11 months after the wedding date. It was like whatever's the later of the two.
Yeah, I
So
actually. Oh, do you want me to read it? I have it in
yes,
front
read
of me
it.
yeah. So couples have to remain married until the initial broadcast of the last episode in which I appear, or 11 months following the wedding date, whichever is later.
Mhm. Right. So that one is a shocker, but I think people kind of were suspicious because, the divorces would come after 1 year if people divorce. The thing about that clause is it's probably the most crazy clause because you're bringing in the freedom to divorce into this like reality TV show contract. It's wild. It's really like an overreach of what you're trying to control. But at the same time, some states don't let you divorce before a year. So it depends, like, how you look at it. The state that a person might have entered that contract in could have had a 1 year requirement because some states do make you stay married for 1 year. And then you're like, well, that's not so crazy. But from a perspective of like a contract having control over your freedom to divorce, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like something a court would uphold. I don't think that there's any way that if you divorce before 1 year, and as long as like you can in the state you're in, I don't see a way where if they try to take legal action, a judge would enforce that contract clause and make you pay whatever fine or damages. It's just too crazy. Like there are so many situations. A person could be, abused. A person could
Mm-hmm.
be afraid. It just could be bad for their mental health. There are so many situations where keeping someone locked in a marriage could be life threatening. It's so dangerous that they would want to put that in their contract, that kind of requirement.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know when um, my divorce happened, it was a very much like I was concerned about this part, because they can, for each contract breach, you're on the hook for $1 million in liquidated damages. So I was concerned that divorcing before, and you get like a pickup letter too, right? For after the altar. So there's a moment where basically it extends the life of your contract. I think the original contract has a piece in there about that. And so my I was served divorce papers before after the altar had aired. And so I was concerned that they could sue us for those liquidated damages because, when you file a divorce, it becomes public record. So
Mhm.
I was served probably on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And then TMZ leaked the divorce that following Sunday, because it was public record. And I woke up to like 100 texts, a million DMs, family calling, all sorts of stuff, because it happened very quickly. But that whole process there, like the added stress of going through this like newly public life, this relationship and marriage that was very real. And a lot of people, I think, look at it, including people in my life, and they don't think they don't take it like it's a real marriage or it was a real relationship because it was on TV, right? But it was like there was a lot of pain and loss, and then doing it in the public eye and not being able to tell people on my own timeline that this wasn't, going to be going forward. And then of course all the speculation. And then on top of that, like, am I going to get sued for $1 million fucking dollars? Like, it's an unnecessary stress when you're in the public eye and you're married to someone that you met through this experience. And it's just, to me, it's just such a crazy piece that I personally experienced and had stress over, because it would have ruined my life to get sued for $1 million.
I was just thinking that whole thing, the threat of $1 million lawsuit over your head really controls you. And I have to imagine that all of those threats, maybe one person was going to leave during the pause. No, there's a threat of 50,000. Maybe someone wasn't going to show up to the altar. No, there's a threat of that. You want a divorce. Like, all of these things essentially control the decisions you make in your life that are important decisions. And maybe you don't want to continue being on TV. You're really losing your freedom to choose how you live your life during this period of time, because they have this money that they're holding over your head that you probably can't pay. So that's really scary, and it doesn't seem ethical. I don't know how it would hold up in court. These are newer types of contracts. But for me, I think that when people enter a contract, and when you enter a contract with a very serious party, like production of a huge show on Netflix, you don't feel like you have the power to break that contract. I know that you must have thought, there's no way around anything I signed because it's ironclad, because they wrote it and they gave it to me, and they're big business people, and I'm just a regular person. So there is that conception that anything you sign is binding. And I think that part is kind of like unfair to everyone who signs it, because they probably make decisions thinking that everything in there is enforceable, even if it isn't. Even if that divorce clause would never hold up. I'm sure a lot of people are way too afraid to even test it, because who wants to risk a potential $1 million lawsuit? That is
You're
just,
exactly
it's
right.
too big of a risk.
And I remember getting the call from Netflix that they weren't going to come after me for $1 million. And it was like, unfortunately, the only time I really, because I was worried about it. I was talking to the publicist from the production company, and I was like, I'm concerned about this. Like, I'm not in any control of this process at this point, and I've asked to just wait. I asked for a few weeks to just like separate, to like clear my head and figure out, is there a path forward for us? In that time I was served. And so I was just kind of like shell shocked, in a continuous state of a heightened nervous system of my marriage ending. I didn't really want it to end. And now am I going to have to deal with a lawsuit because we're ruining after the altar release in a couple weeks?
She wasn't scared of the potential lawsuit?
I don't think
she wasn't thinking about it.
I don't think she was thinking about it in the same way that I was thinking about it. We had different upbringings too. So I think like there was a different financial mindset when it comes to something like that, where I grew up, lower middle class, poor, every dollar counts. And so, I look at it like $1 million, I lose my house, I lose everything. Yeah. And I just don't think that, based on, her coming from a little bit of a different, financial situation, thought about money in this case the same way I did. Okay. And that's my interpretation. But, and to be clear, like, she and I are fine on, well, we don't really speak, but like, we've cleared the air and, have a, I don't know what's the right word to use that's not going to spark any controversy, but we're cordial. That's the word I'm looking for. We're cordial. Yeah. So one of the last, I have like probably 2 or 3 more questions for you, but one of them I wanted to ask, we kind of touched on. So there's lawsuits claiming false imprisonment, right? And I have talked to several attorneys in several different fields, and they all say this: if you want to leave and they don't let you leave, it is false imprisonment. I know for Danielle and I, when we were in Mexico on our trip, she had a panic attack. We wanted to leave. They ended up talking us into staying. But I remember feeling at that moment where I'm like, I don't have my passport. I don't have an ID. I don't have money. I don't have anything. Like, I actually can't leave unless they give that to me because I'm in Mexico. What am I going to do? Run out of this resort that we're in without any ID or money and just tell someone I've been held captive by a reality show? Right. Like, so that was my first feeling at the time, that like, I'm really not able to leave. And then I look back on it and I see this kind of showing itself throughout the whole pod experience and showing itself in other areas where people didn't want to film anymore. Someone wanted to leave and they were, not able to leave. So what are your thoughts from a legal perspective on the false imprisonment claims that people have made and that are also in litigation?
Yeah. The thing about feeling imprisoned when it comes to false imprisonment in a civil action is that, like, a big part of it is the perception. And what you're describing is that they kind of create a perception for you by taking all those things that, would connect you to the outside world, your passport, your ID. They do it under the guise of, you have to commit 100% to this experience. And these are the ways you do it. But it also creates a sensation, and I'm sure a psychological state where you really have nowhere to go, because if someone really does take away, I'm just imagining for myself, if someone did take away my phone and my ID and I owe them a lot of money unless I have a really good reason for leaving, I'm not going to try to leave, but things can get ugly for me. I might be in a really bad state, but I, like you, I'm not risking that kind of money. I didn't grow up with that mindset where, like, okay, what's 50,000? No, that would be huge. So to me, when it comes to an allegation like that, it's all in the facts. It's fact specific. So when you bring in all those facts and the psychological state that you're in when all those things are taken away, I think there is a claim for false imprisonment. Now, I don't know if it will win, because that really probably depends on the situation of each person. And maybe, maybe they would bring in, hey, I didn't even have 50,000 and I certainly didn't have an emergency. I just didn't feel well mentally. I just couldn't handle it anymore. And so yeah, stop that you should have been able to go and you couldn't go, or you're made to feel like you had no place to go. That sounds like false imprisonment to me. That sounds like it to me.
Yeah, I think so too. And like I said, I had thought about it there. And then when the lawsuits came and I've heard those stories, it's, I didn't have it nearly as bad as anyone else had it. And I hear, the stories, and I've read the, what is it, Legal 360 documentation and stuff. And I just think to myself, my God, like, that is a horrible situation to be in.
And I think I was mentioning this before we were recording, but I get a lot of comments on these reels where I talk about these lawsuits. And there's like this lack of sympathy for the former cast members who are suing, and this sentiment that runs like, boo-hoo, you signed up for it, you signed this contract. And, it makes you think, like, why do people feel like, just because you sign it, that you really understand what it's going to be like once you're in it? First of all, how many contracts do people blindly sign every single day? Because there are contracts that are barriers to entry. There's a contract that I sign on my phone if I want to use it, that I and click agree, because there's no
No.
don't agree. But okay, this is not the same, but I'm just saying, we're
No,
not
you're
all
right.
like, yeah, we're not all sitting here and combing through our contracts. So yes, you all do sign it, but it's conceivable that you signed something with one idea in mind, and you didn't know that once you started filming that the way things would truly be. You can't really predict how you're going to feel in a situation. You might say, here's my ID, my passport, sure, no problem, because I'm excited to go. But then when you're dying to leave, where's my ID, where's my passport? Like, you're no longer in the same mindset. So I just think that, like, people need to, I guess, humanize people who are on this show a little more, and you guys are just regular people. So to think that you're entering these contracts with a sophisticated mind, there's actually a concept when a contract is disputed in court. There's a concept of considering the sophistication of the parties that enter. So when two corporations enter a contract and then they fight over the terms, which happens all the time, they'll say, you're both sophisticated players. You know exactly what you're entering. We're going to give latitude to the words of the contract. But here you have one, regular person with no legal knowledge for the most part, and a very sophisticated party on the other end. And it's inherently an unfair scenario.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've said this 100 times, but until you go through it, you really don't know. Like, you can sit here and say, oh, I would be fine filming 18 hours a day. I would be fine being locked in a hotel room without my passport or my autonomy or anything like that. But until you live it, you just really don't know it. And that begs, to me, what this does is it begs the question, and if you have thoughts on it, great. But, as I mentioned to you in our communication, like, there are several NLRB charges claiming that reality cast members are misclassified as contractors instead of employees. And by doing that charge, and that's the National Labor Relations Board for anyone who's unfamiliar, the idea is that my concept from this, I should say, came from, can you actually contract away your legal labor rights? Can you contract away the laws that we have in this country around defamation? If this show misrepresents you and defames you, as they say in the contract they can do, can you really go against the laws that we've established in this country as a civilized group of people? Can you really sign those away? And that's what I think is so interesting, because if you do it from the labor perspective, there's over 30 violations in the contract, according to the NLRB charge, claiming that these 30 plus things would be illegal if we were classified as employees and protected by labor law. So
Yeah,
can you contract those things away, I guess, is my
that's a good
question.
question. People in contracts and drafts all the time try to draft away liability, even when there are laws that cover people. So when it comes to labor law, you actually can't really contract away your rights under labor law. There are certain protections, particularly wage and hour laws, where it comes to overtime pay and minimum wage regulation, that even if the contract says you agree to a certain salary, when it is an employment contract, you can't really contract away. Like, you will still have a right to sue for unpaid wages. So it's a very interesting avenue when you start to look at the contract as an employment contract and your regular employees. You have a lot more protection. And then when it comes to the NDA, which says, like, you can't talk about all these things that happen. Well, if it was a workplace and if things happen that maybe violated your rights, maybe there was sexual harassment, maybe whatever happened, you actually have to be allowed to talk about those things, because labor laws
Wages too.
labor laws protect you from being able to talk about those things, because talking about those things are the only ways you can make change. If you don't, like, that's how unions get formed. You need to be able to talk about unfair wages, unfair practices in the workplace. Otherwise, what it's kept under the rug. No one knows, and nothing changes. So it's really interesting to me that there are NLRB causes of action and complaints made, because if this becomes clear that your employees, they're probably going to have to rewrite this contract entirely, or they're just going to be like, okay, we're going to, we'll see you in court, because a lot of these things are not going to hold up anymore. And then you asked me about the defamation. So that's actually interesting, because consent is a defense to defamation. So if you consent to being, something being said about you, that's a defense on their side. But I think there's nuance there too, because I was looking at I call it the bad edit clause. And I was reading it, and it sounded like you're basically saying, I agree that the nature of TV may be that I might not look good and people might not like me. I could look like the bad guy. That's understandable. I think that that's an important clause to have in there because that's going to happen. Not everybody's going to be likable. And you could be the subject of hate because you're on TV. And that's like an assumption of risk. It's a risk you choose to knowingly assume. But I think there's that. And then there's an intentional, using the filming techniques and using different clips and splicing them together to create something from nothing that ends up being defamatory and gives you this really bad image. To me, that's different. And to me, I don't know if you can necessarily consent to that because that seems like out of the scope of what you. Yeah. And I don't think like when you sign a contract, you imagine that. You might imagine, okay, I might look bad because I don't know how I'm going to act on TV. But you don't think they're going to make you look bad purposely. I don't think, right?
That is, I'm going to listen to this and memorize it because you said it way better than any of the times I've tried to say the same thing. That's exactly it. And I remember I specifically told you before we got on here today, I read that part and I was like, well, I have good value system. I don't really do anything out of character. I'll be fine. I was, thank God. But I guarantee you a lot of the quote villains, which by the way, I like to remind people, every show has a villain. So are we really having that many bad people all the time on TV, or are people being edited into a character? Food for thought.
I think like Trevor this season when he came out, I don't know about everyone, but I know a lot of my friends who were like, we felt bad for him. And I think they created a villain that not all of us hated. He was just the guy who like did something stupid. I don't think that I think they sometimes are very clear with the villain they're creating, and you can see the intent behind it. And when it's intentional, it feels wrong, and it just feels like it's not the same as you came across that. It feels like it's concerted.
Definitely. And I think there's something different. And here's another argument a lot of people say is, well, you actually said that. Well, yes. And first of all, we all say stupid stuff sometimes. I know I'm guilty. I'm sure you're guilty. And also, most people aren't doing it in front of the whole world on TV. And I think about, I empathize with the Vanderpump Rules and with Rachel Leviss, right? Because she made a mistake. She'll admit she made a mistake. But if someone makes that level of mistake in the real life, sure, they might have some scrutiny and judgment from friends and family, but they don't have scrutiny and judgment from millions and millions of people around the globe watching their mistake play out in real time. So
yeah,
even if you disagree with
that the way your friends and family will respond is one way, and even if it's harsh, I don't think it's anything like what people from the middle of nowhere who are watching, the way that they're going to speak to you, that level of hatred and anger. I don't think anyone can expect that.
Or prepare for it. And if you do say something, you may be watching Frankenbiting, right? Or you might be seeing Frankenbiting is when they put a word from another scene in your mouth in different contexts. So like if they showed us back, like a back of my head talking to you right now, and I said, fuck you, or this is stupid, or whatever that is, they'll put it there, even though I said it in a different scene about a different thing with absolutely different context, but they're crafting a story to make it seem like I'm saying it to you. So that happens. And you think about that. Yeah, right. And like, yeah, I did say that, but I said it to somebody else in different context, or you're missing the complete context of this piece. And that actually Frankenbiting didn't happen, but in our season, there's a point, this is where I got a lot of my negative detractors, was there's a scene where I come up to Danielle and Shayna when we're on the beach and I say, Natalie is crazy. And I was saying that based on a conversation I had just had with Shane that they decided not to show. So it just seemed like I out of nowhere was talking shit. And I think that's not the case at all. Actually, I just had a full conversation where Shane was talking to me about some stuff and I was like, my mind was blown. And so it's even that, it's like you don't get the context.
That's going to make you look like a little bit shadier, a little bit more gossipier than you really are. And That's
Yeah.
going to affect how everyone sees you. So that's how they're using like a seemingly innocuous technique that they already got you to agree to, but they're using it in a very devious way.
Yes, exactly. So I think I really appreciate your take on this stuff. This is really good. I have one last question actually. What would you say? Would you, first of all, would you do a contract review for someone that's going on a reality show, or is that kind of out of your peripherals?
Yeah, totally. I love reviewing contracts.
Okay, very cool. So that's noted. You get someone that comes to you and they're a client of yours and they hand you this contract. What advice do you give them, or what direction do you give them?
Okay, so the thing with a contract that I would advise on is that every time you receive a contract, it's a starting point. Now, this kind of contract, I don't think is the same as, let's say, some of the construction contracts that will come my way, or a sales contract, where we're really crossing out whole terms. We're changing language completely. That's not this contract. But that doesn't mean that you have to just take whatever you've received, sign it, and go. You need to, really like review, I think, with an attorney, because an attorney is going to translate certain terms that might not even make sense to you, but you're just reading them. Like, there are certain little terms that have a deeper meaning that you might not realize that your attorney's going to red flag for you. You need to feel comfortable taking changes back to them and standing up for yourself. And then you really need to think about the things that you, let's say, don't jive with or worry you, whether they're worth the risk. If you really want to, like, if they come back and say the last, that's not really negotiable, are you willing to, knowing that they're holding steadfast to that? Because that also tells you something, right? They're not, they're not willing to budge on that. That really means that that's something that is important to them, and they might, take action on in the future. Do you still want to go through with that? And how and on, like, is it worth it? I think.
I think that's very, very good advice, and very, very, very important for people who are looking at these contracts. And, you can always think the best case scenario. You could probably not imagine the worst case scenario if it's not something you've lived through, or you know someone who's gone through it, or you've sat there with someone who is, frozen and just mental health shot, and the whole world saying something about you. Good, not very often; bad, mostly often. And I always say too, I think people would find a reason to hate Santa Claus if he was on a reality TV show. So
So true.
yeah, it's like, yeah, what's this creepy guy breaking into kids' houses and giving them presents?
Yeah, sitting on the
it's
laps, it's all very messy.
right. Well, yeah, maybe that's not the best example, but exactly. So, well, thank you. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to ask me anything.
The pain is really blind. That's all. What do you think?
I think it can be. I think what's so interesting about not just this experiment show, whatever you want to call it, I think the reality is that if it's easy for me to say yes, it's also be easy for me to say no. I think, given my story, what could have happened, but I do think that looks have something to do with everything. Like, you have to be attracted to the person. What I find interesting, and I was lucky, Danielle's beautiful, right? So there's that element of it. Like, there was no way I wasn't going to
People
be
always say they
attracted.
never really cast anyone too ugly on the show, but this is like, we don't really
Right.
know if love is blind because everyone's pretty attractive.
I think I actually am surprised we haven't had that storyline pushed of people being repulsed when they see each other for the first time. I'm shocked.
There was someone, Deepti, right? Her guy, I forgot his name.
Oh
He
yeah,
was
Shake.
repulsed, but he made looks like a big thing, and she was really pretty, so it was like weird too.
Yeah.
But he was like very hung up on.
That was
But I
a
think like
yeah, that
it's
was a
interesting because like even if someone's objectively pretty, I always think about this, or good looking or handsome, because they might not be something that you're attracted to. They could just be a good looking
exactly.
person, but then you still don't feel a spark. because you're not attracted to them. And another
Yeah.
thing that I always think about is like, okay, so love is blind. You're in a and you can't see the person, so you're vibing on what they're saying, right? But there's this element of like facial expressions. Like, what if they're making? What if their expressions are so goofy or off that you would see that you wouldn't vibe with that conversation either? They're just like, like it's the mannerisms, it's the way they say. I remember someone was like confessing this like deep story one time, with the other person behind the pod was like doing sit-ups. It's like love is blind, yeah, but like if they were doing that in person, you would just like walk away because that's just crazy. So I don't know.
And no, I'm with you. And you got to wonder if that person doing sit-ups was doing that during a different date, or doing that when they were waiting for someone to come into the pod, because
I
that's how these
never
things
thought
are.
of that.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
how they're
that's a
put
good
together. So
point. That actually makes more sense.
I know, right? I know. And I remember like I would pace sometimes when I was waiting for someone to come in or whatever, just pace around the pod to get my steps in. And there was probably footage of me pacing around these pods that could have been used
Like
to
you looking
do all
like a
sorts
nervous
of.
wreck while you're in a conversation.
Exactly.
Right.
So is love blind? I think it can be. I don't think it exclusively is. I asked myself, about that question. I got to know Danielle and fell in love with her without seeing her. Then I saw her and she's objectively beautiful. And I wonder, I'm like, if she wasn't, would that love be there? Or is she beautiful to me in this whole other way because I know her on the inside as well? So it's like almost a
And we'll never be
mind.
able to answer that
I'll
because
never
you
be able
already
to
have
answer
that
it.
feeling. Yeah. That's really
Exactly.
interesting.
So I think it can
That's the
be.
true cool part of the show. When you like, especially people who will come out and say, yeah, they're not my normal type, but I'm still in love with them. And then you kind of do see that love is blind element, that you can fall in love with someone's personality and mind. And then when you see them, that attraction is there because you've already built that strong
Yes.
emotional connection. So I do
I
believe in it. But I
do.
also think that sometimes it's just not true. And sometimes people can't get past the looks. And I think the show has shown me that. So, like, I think the show has also shown me how important looks are in a relationship. Because some relationships can't progress past that look problem, and they just
Yes.
don't, with everything else being good, they still can't succeed.
Yeah, I think you're right. And actually, like I've never dated anyone that looked like Danielle or had her her look really. Like I'd always kind of dated different looking types of people. So that is interesting perception too. Like would I find her attractive? I mean, I would walking down the street, but it's not necessarily someone I would approach maybe
Right.
in real life. So it's that's such an interesting thought experiment. And the fact that I lived in a 3-flat for 5 years in Chicago, and for 2 of those years, her best friend lived right below me, and she was in and out of that apartment all the time, and we never ran into each other. So yeah,
Okay,
and
now
I also
like it was meant to be, and it was like
that's what we
more
used to
like
say.
spiritual and deep. Now you're giving a lot of credence to the show.
Well, you want to make it a step further. I actually interviewed at her dad's company back in 2013.
And those stories like this, that's
and
so
it was
cute.
small. It was
Oh
a
my
small
gosh.
company.
Yeah.
So
it was meant to be. You guys were gonna find each other no matter what. And even if it didn't work out, I'm sure like you appreciate that time in your life and that experience. It sounds like you are very positive about it.
exactly. And that's why when people ask me, would you do it again? Like there's a lot of pain and a lot of trauma and a lot of frustration and, a lot of now I'm like doing this whole thing with my foundation and I'm fighting this gigantic industry that's this level of this, CIA, like I said earlier. And I'm like, I'm going and doing this and I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for others and I'm doing it with others. I'm not doing this alone. I'm doing this with lots of other people. But I think to myself, I'm like, would I do this again? Like I never thought this would be the hill I would die on, would be like taking on a giant reality
I'm very
TV
into
industry.
like things being meant to be, and I really feel like maybe you were meant to have this platform, and you said you liked politics, and that means you kind of always wanted to make some change or have
It's
some
more on
impact.
brand.
Yeah, you weren't meant to be just, sitting in an office. You were meant to do something and change, shake things up. And that was your way of getting there. So you have to take
I
every
love that.
opportunity that comes your way and see how it can propel you. And I think like that's what, brings it all back to people on the show for the right reason. People are taking opportunities that are coming their way that could bring more opportunities in the future. And, there's nothing wrong with that either. You can't fault people for doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I always thought I was actually voted most likely to be famous in junior high. And
Oh,
several several classmates sent me a picture of that yearbook. And it was a small Catholic school, so there was like 18 of us. But the funny thing
wow.
is, it was always going to be for my ideas. I was going to be a filmmaker. I was going to be um, president. It was always my ideas. And I remember the first time someone came up to me since the show and was like, I love what you're doing with You Can. I was like, oh, that is so much better than I loved you on the show. Like
Oh my God.
hearing that and being like, okay, it's my ideas again. Because I don't really like the spotlight. I don't like it to be about me. I like it to be about, same with the show. Like I like it to be about what I'm thinking about, but like, let's get someone who knows what the hell they're talking about on to share their story and their expertise and, give that sort of, again, the ideas are more important than the person in my view. And so
I think that's
it has
awesome.
been, yeah, much more on brand and fulfilling for me to do this than to just be famous for a relationship that was on TV.
Yeah, I think that that's incredible. And it's amazing to see like you've been able to go from being one of the people in the pods to advocating for reality TV and bringing awareness to something that people don't probably even think about. And that's really cool when you can bring something to the forefront that no one's really thinking about, and maybe people didn't care that much, but you're making people care. That's incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I want to thank you again. This was such a good interview, and
It
you
was
bringing on
great.
your expertise and what you're doing on TikTok and Instagram to sort of shed some light on the alarming and maybe not so alarming things in these contracts. But where can people find you and connect with you on social and your website?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Jasmine Weg ESQ. I'm on TikTok, Jazz the Lawyer, and my website is wegesq.com. I love making TikToks and Instagram Reels. I find it fun. I sometimes mine are silly. So I was high on his mind or talking about possible jury lawsuits because I think a lot of legal action happens in the news and people don't really know what they're about. And I feel like it's nice to have a legal perspective. I'm enjoying it and it's fun. So come join me.
Awesome. And those links will be down in the show notes or the show description. And we'll have to connect again. I'm sure there's going to be more for us to
Yeah,
do
this
another
was so
episode on
fun.
somewhere.
I
Yeah, it
loved it.
was.
Thank you so much for
Good.
having me.
It was truly my pleasure. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.